Welcome back, explorers, to Whoosh Tales, the home of the most extraordinary kids' adventure stories anywhere on the internet, bringing you a brand new English story for children every single week. This is episode 8, and if you watched episode 7, you already know that everything in Finn Walker's world has just changed in the most beautiful and most enormous way it could possibly change. He has met his brother, the boy who shares his name. The boy who has waited 11 years inside a mountain reading hundreds of books and looking at a single painting of a sunset every day. The boy who walked out of that mountain at pre-dawn 3 days ago and stood beside Finn on the rocky shore and watched his very first sunset and said, very quietly, that it was so much better than the books. This episode is about what happened the next morning, when the sun came up for real, fully and completely above the Highland horizon, and touched him for the very first time, and revealed something nobody saw coming. The two Finns slept in the same room that first night back at the cottage. Nobody had discussed it. It had simply happened naturally, the way certain things happen naturally when they are clearly the right thing. The mountain Finn was offered the bed in Finn's room, and Finn pulled extra blankets from the cupboard and made up a soft place on the rug beside the bed, and they had lain in the dark talking quietly for hours. About small things, mostly. About the books in the room inside the mountain. About what Highland tea tasted like compared to the warm drink the candle had somehow always kept ready for him on the table. About what it was like to have an older sister, and whether Nora was as scary as she occasionally seemed. About Ember and the very particular sound her wings made and what it felt like to fly. The mountain Finn had asked the questions of someone who had read about everything but experienced nothing, and Finn had answered them with the careful attention of someone discovering for the first time how much of his ordinary life had been quietly extraordinary the whole time. They had decided on the second day to call the mountain Finn by his middle name. It had taken some thinking. Old Thomas, when consulted, had closed his eyes for a long moment and then opened them and said, "Your grandfather wrote it down. Both of your full names. Both middle names, too. He wrote them down 12 years ago in the journal I have been keeping for him since he asked me to." He had brought the journal to the cottage that afternoon and shown them. There in the careful slanting handwriting, 2 names. Finn Alexander Walker, born on the 17th of June, and the second name, Finn Caleb Walker, with no birth date written beside it, but the same year and the same village marked clearly. The mountain Finn had read his own full name for the first time and had been quiet for a long, careful moment, and then had said, "Caleb. Yes, Caleb is right." So Caleb he became, and the cottage already felt as if it had always had 2 boys in it instead of 1. That night Caleb did not sleep much. Finn knew because he did not sleep much either and could hear his brother's breathing, soft and slow and awake in the dark beside the bed. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. They were both waiting for the same thing. The first proper sunrise. The first time Caleb would be outside, fully outside, with the sun rising over the eastern horizon and the morning unfolding around them the way mornings unfold for everybody in the world except him. They went out at exactly the right time. Finn had judged it carefully. He had wanted Caleb to be in position before the sun cleared the eastern hills, to be sitting outside in the cold gray blue of pre-dawn and to watch the whole thing happen from the very beginning. They walked up the hill behind the cottage in their boots and their warm jackets, Caleb wearing one of Finn's older coats that fit him perfectly because of course it did. Nora came too, 2 steps behind them, with 3 flasks of tea and a packet of biscuits because Nora believed deeply that all important moments should be properly catered. Ember met them at the top of the hill, already settled on the grass with her wings folded, golden eyes bright in the pre-dawn dimness, ember sparks drifting up from her scales in the cold air. They sat together on the cold grass at the top of the hill. The valley spread below them in deep, gray-blue silence. Stonehaven village was still mostly asleep, just a few thin threads of cottage chimney, smoke rising into the still air. To the east the sky was beginning to soften, that first deep change of color that arrives perhaps 15 minutes before any actual sunlight reaches the ground, when the night blue starts to develop the faintest pale blush behind it, the visible promise of something that has not yet arrived but is unmistakably coming. Caleb watched the eastern sky with the focused, attentive stillness of someone who did not want to miss a single second of it. He did not blink more than he had to. He barely breathed. Finn watched his brother more than he watched the sky. because the sky he had seen turned from night to morning thousands of times in his 10 years of life, and Caleb was something entirely new in the world, and the privilege of being the one sitting beside him during this particular 15 minutes was the kind of privilege Finn already understood he would not have many of in his life and intended to pay full attention to. The pale blush deepened slowly into rose. The rose deepened into the soft, warm pink of the inside of a seashell. The first proper color bled up along the horizon in a thin line and slowly thickened, and the cold gray blue of the rest of the sky began to retreat upward and to the west, surrendering its territory politely to the warm gold that was beginning to push up from below. The first birds began their morning sounds in the trees behind them, low at first, single tentative notes, then more confidently as the light strengthened. The smell of the morning shifted as it always shifted at this hour, the deep, cold mineral smell of overnight Highland air softening as the temperature began to lift, the scent of dew warming on grass, the very faint living smell of plants beginning their first photosynthesis of the day. Caleb breathed all of it in with the slow, careful inhalations of someone receiving sensory information for the very first time and finding that there was more of it, more layers and textures and richness, than the books had been able to prepare him for at all. Then the sun broke the horizon. It came up over the eastern hills in a single decisive arc of pure, brilliant gold, and the first direct ray of it traveled across the valley and up the hillside and reached the top of the hill where the four of them were sitting and touched the side of Caleb's face. For the very first time in his 11 years of life, actual sunlight made direct contact with the skin of the mountain boy, and the world stopped. That is the only way Finn could later describe what happened in that moment. The world stopped. Not metaphorically, genuinely. The bird sounds in the trees behind them paused mid-note. The thin curls of chimney smoke in the valley below halted in their slow upward drift and hung perfectly motionless in the cold air. The dew on the grass beneath their hands stopped catching the light and simply became light. Even Ember, who had seemed in continuous motion at the edges of every breath since Finn had known her, became completely still. The whole valley held its breath, and the sunlight that had touched Caleb's cheek did not simply illuminate his skin the way sunlight illuminates everyone's skin. It paused. It came to rest against his face for one suspended moment, and then very gently and very deliberately it began to do something with him that Finn had never seen sunlight do to a human being. It began to soak in, not the way sunlight soaks into anything else, not the slow warming of skin or the chemistry of vitamin D production, but actively, intelligently, recognizing something in Caleb that it had been waiting to recognize. The first golden touch spread from his cheek across his face and down his neck and along his arms, and Caleb's skin began to glow. Not brightly, softly, the same warm amber gold as the inside of the mountain chamber, the same color as the light of the columns and the candle and the slowly pulsing lens that had brought them here. His pale skin held the sunlight inside it the way the columns of the mountain had held compressed light for millions of years, gently and permanently, and without any apparent effort on his part. Caleb did not move. His eyes were closed. The expression on his face was the expression of someone receiving something deeper than sensation, something more like recognition. His shoulders settled. His hands relaxed on the grass beside him. The sunlight that had paused at the moment of contact resumed its slow, careful arc across the valley as the rest of the world quietly remembered how to keep moving. But Caleb himself continued to glow, soft amber gold from within his skin, as if a switch had been flipped that had been waiting 11 years to be flipped, and now that it had been, there was no question of switching it off again. He was simply someone who held light now. It was clearly going to be a permanent feature of who he was. Nora made a small sound that was not quite a word. Finn looked at his brother glowing softly in the morning light beside him and could not immediately speak. Ember rose to her feet very slowly and walked the few paces over to Caleb and pressed her warm crimson nose gently against his shoulder. The contact made the glow on his skin brighten slightly, in the way that warm coals brighten when they are blown on, and then settle back to its steady, soft luminance. After a long moment, Caleb opened his eyes. He looked at his own hands. He turned them over. The glow was visible on the palms too, gentle and warm, the color of afternoon light through honey. He looked at Finn. His face was full of something complicated. Wonder mostly. A small amount of fear underneath the wonder, Because anything that happens to you that you did not know was going to happen carries a small amount of fear regardless of what it turns out to be. And underneath both of those, the unmistakable expression of someone who has just understood something about himself that he had not known and is now turning the understanding carefully over in his mind to see what shape it actually is. I think, Caleb said slowly, that this is why I was in the room. Finn watched him. I do not mean as a hiding place, Caleb said. I mean as a place where I would be ready. He looked at his glowing hands. Whatever this is, the sun does not do this to everyone. This is something I can do, or something the sun does because of who I am. The room kept me safe until I was old enough to receive it. He looked up at the rising sun above the eastern hills with an expression of deep, careful gratitude. And then it could happen properly. Old Thomas arrived just then. He had walked up the hill behind them, and now he stopped a few meters away and looked at Caleb glowing gently in the morning light, and his ancient eyes filled with the particular complicated emotion of a person who has waited a very long time to see something become real and is now witnessing it happen for the first time. He said, very quietly, "You do not know about the old ones yet, do you, boys?" Caleb and Finn both looked at him. Old Thomas walked closer and lowered himself slowly to sit on the grass beside them, his wooden staff across his knees. The old ones, he said, were a kind of person, a kind that has not been alive on this world for a very long time. 3,000 years, give or take a few centuries. They were not different from other humans in their bodies or their minds. They were different in one thing only. They could hold sunlight, the way Caleb is holding it now. It gathered inside them when they were touched by direct sunlight, and they could carry it with them into dark places, into deep places, into the corners of the world where light is needed and is not naturally able to go. Caleb looked at his hands. "So you knew?" he said. Old Thomas nodded slowly. "Your grandfather suspected," he said. "He could not be certain. There was no way to be certain without the mountain keeping you safe until you were old enough to receive the sun directly without it overwhelming you. But he suspected, when he found the room and understood what it was for, that you might be one of them. The first one in 3,000 years. He spent the rest of his life making sure that when the right moment came, you would be here and ready, and that your brother would be the one to invite you out. Because the work the old ones used to do is needed again, and nobody else can do it." Caleb was quiet for a long time looking out across the valley. Then he said, "What is the work?" Old Thomas looked at the sun above the eastern hills. "There are places," he said, "where the natural light of the world has been blocked for centuries. By things that happened, by things that were done, by accidents and choices, and the slow accumulation of forgetting. Some of those places are physical. Caves, chambers, cities under ice. Some of them are not physical at all, but you still need light to enter them. The old ones used to carry sunlight into all of those places and let it out where it was needed. To grow things that had stopped growing. To wake things that had been sleeping in the wrong kind of dark. To heal things that needed warmth in places the sun itself could not reach." Old Thomas looked at Caleb. "You can do that now, once you have learned how." Caleb looked at his hands again. They were still glowing softly. Then he closed his fingers slowly into fists, and the glow remained, held now, contained, a warm light visible faintly through the skin of his closed hands like the light inside a paper lantern. He opened his hands, and the light spread out across his palms and brightened slightly. He closed them, and it dimmed. He smiled. The smile that crossed his face was the same smile Finn smiled, but used now for something Finn could not yet share, the particular smile of someone discovering that they have a gift they did not know about, and finding that the gift feels exactly right. "I can do that," Caleb said quietly. "I can definitely do that." Finn watched his brother glow in the Highland morning, and he felt something settle inside him that had been quietly unsettled since they had walked out of the mountain 3 days ago. Caleb's life had been preparation, yes, but not preparation for shelter. Preparation for purpose. The room in the mountain had not been a hiding place from the world. It had been a careful, patient, gentle, slow-growing place, like a seed kept in warm soil until conditions were exactly right for it to emerge into its own particular kind of life. And the conditions had finally arrived. The first ray of direct sunlight on his brother's skin had been the signal. Finn thought about all of the previous adventures, about Malakar's loneliness, about Thaler's patient guarding, about the Silver Navigator sleeping among the stars, about the Greywood's protected memory, about the mountain itself condensed into recognition. And he understood, with the kind of understanding that arrives complete rather than in pieces, that each of those encounters had been preparing him to, teaching him the qualities he was going to need: courage, patience, presence, attention, restraint, for what was about to begin with his brother. The two of them together, carrying the original compass and a warm interior light between them, going into places where light was needed and finding the right way to leave some of it behind. Caleb sat in the Highland morning, glowing softly with the light of the sun he had finally met after 11 years of waiting, and Finn sat beside him, and Nora handed them both a flask of tea, and old Thomas watched them with the deep, tired, satisfied expression of a man who had been the only one who fully knew what was at stake and had carried that knowledge alone for 40 years and was now finally able to set it down. The sun rose properly. The valley woke up. A new kind of light, ancient and gentle, sat on a Highland hilltop drinking tea with his brother and his sister and a dragon, and the world was somehow exactly what it had always been, and also completely different all at once. And that is the lesson at the center of this adventure story for kids, explorers, and it is one of the gentlest and most important lessons any of these stories has yet offered. There are people in your life, friends, family, classmates, the quiet kid in the back of the room you have not really gotten to know yet, who carry gifts inside them that they themselves do not yet fully know about. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone you love is not to teach them anything, or to fix anything, or to give them anything. It is simply to bring them into the right light, to invite them outside, to stand beside them at the moment the conditions become right for who they really are to finally appear. You do not need to know what their gift is. You only need to trust that one is there. Trust the people you love enough to invite them into the brightness with you. That is how the best gifts in the world get discovered. Always. Hey explorers, if you climbed up that hill with Finn and watched Caleb's very first sunrise touch his face and saw what happened next, give this video the biggest thumbs up it has ever received, because you genuinely earned every single moment of it today. Our comment question is the most beautiful one we have ever asked. If sunlight could reveal one true thing about you, one secret quality that has been waiting inside you, what do you hope it would reveal? Tell us below. Every single answer matters, and every single one gets read. Subscribe to Whoosh Tales right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single adventure story for kids. Because next week a second compass appears, smaller than Finn's, different, and it belongs to Caleb. And it points in a direction that none of the others have ever pointed in, towards something the world has been quietly hiding from both of them since the very beginning. We will see you next week, explorers. Hush! That evening Caleb sat by the kitchen window, watching the late afternoon light move slowly across the village. His skin was no longer actively glowing. That, he had discovered through quiet experimentation throughout the day, was something he could turn on and off the way other people could close or open their hands. But there was a warmth visible in him now that had not been there before, a quality of internal light that even in shadow gave him the faint warm presence of someone standing slightly closer to the sun than everyone else in the room. He held a small object in his hands. It had appeared in his pocket sometime during the morning. None of them had seen it arrive, the way the lens had appeared in Finn's hoodie after the gray wood. It was a compass, smaller than Finn's. The casing was a color Finn had never quite seen before, somewhere between gold and warm white, the color sunlight would be if you could hold it. The needle was made of the same compressed light. Caleb turned it gently in his palms and watched the needle find its direction. It pointed toward the south, toward something Finn's compass had never pointed at, toward something neither of them yet knew the name of. Caleb looked up at Finn standing beside him watching, and he smiled. The same smile, used now for something brand new, and he said, "Well, brother, it looks like we have somewhere to go."